This is the London Fintech Podcast, brought to you by your host, Mike Ballerman, bridging the worlds of suits and t-shirts, of finance and technology, bringing you insights, stories, and inspiration from the golden age of opportunity and innovation happening in London right now.
Hi, this is Mike Ballerman, and this is the London Fintech Podcast, episode 235, brought to you in association with Smart and thelistedboard.com, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Eva Zhang, CEO of Alipay UK, to talk about Fintech in China. Dedicated Fintechers, such as yourselves, with your fingers on the pulse, may have heard of Alipay, founded near 20 years ago by Jack Ma as part of the Alibaba Group, but later split off. They overtook PayPal as long ago as 2013 to become the world's largest online/mobile payments platform. They serve an astonishing in excess of 1.3 billion users and 80 million merchants, which is quite impressive and must take some counting. Furthermore, the Alipay app doesn't just do payments, but a wide range of functionalities, including ride sharing, travel bookings, and medical appointments, as I was amazed to find out this morning in my in-depth research, also known as reading a very poorly edited article on Wikipedia. Definitely a fintech one should know about. Furthermore, those of you who studied geography at school, which probably gets fewer and fewer, may have heard of China. It's quite a large country east of Suez with an ancient history and culture. Less ancient and up to date, it's either, I think, the world's largest economy or second largest economy, about to be the first, or some such. Even if China isn't the world's largest fintech market or world's largest economy or anything like that, I do recall Peter Renton, founder of Lendit, about some 5 years ago on this podcast, giving us an overview of fintech around the world, as his conferences at the time covered the world, one annual event being in China, saying that if you wanted to know about the future of fintech, just go to China. So without further ado, let's dive into what is perhaps the world's largest market for fintech in conversation with the world's largest payment platform. Plenty to talk about, so let's get on with the show. Good morning, Eva. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks very much for the invitation. I really enjoyed your previous podcast.
Ah, excellent. Yes, well, it's rare that people say they enjoy the podcast.
I do, actually.
You're very polite, so you're showing top Chinese characteristics already, which is be flattering. And as listeners may know, I have a little connection with China and Chinese culture myself, being, I was about to say on my spare time, but I'm not actively active at the moment. A sifu myself, which is probably untranslatable into English, but it's something between teacher and father in a type of Qigong called Jianzhong, and as a side effect of that, in a little known fact, my name is on a plaque on a really important cemetery outside Beijing, actually, called the Babaoshan, sorry for my lack of Chinese pronunciation, Revolutionary Cemetery, which is full of revolutionary heroes. And this is not because I'm a ghost of a revolutionary hero, but also these days that it includes cultural icons, such as my Sigang, my master's master in simple English, Professor Yu Yong Nian, who used Jianzhong, which is a system of Qigong involving standing still, some listeners may have heard of it as stand like a tree, to cure chronic health conditions and things like this in, I think it was the Beijing Railway Hospital. Yeah, so anyway, there's a plaque there dedicated to Professor Yu, and my name is on it. So my name exists just outside Beijing, and you can actually see it on YouTube if you find the right YouTube.
Yeah, that's incredible, Mike. Actually, as you mentioned, the Qigong, so like a little bit, actual information here. So when I joined the Alibaba Group, I think almost 7 years ago, that we had about 1 week of new beginner courses. So it is 1 week of different studies, and at the end of that week, actually we had 1 hour of Qigong classes. That is a very interesting way to tap into that culture.
Yes, and it's probably like learning the language, which I haven't, but I have friends who have learned Chinese. I think you can only really understand a different culture by learning their language or by learning one of their arts in a traditional fashion. So I learned in a traditional fashion, which requires some patience. There is this sort of Chinese martial arts saying, or maybe Chinese saying in general, eat bitter, which is sort of basically means you suffer first, eat bitter first, sweet later. So you have to do all the suffering, which is something that the West has forgotten, because now the West wants the state just to give them sweets without the eat bitter. So that's actually the one reason I don't teach it really, which is that if I taught it, I'd teach it in a quotes relatively Chinese way. And none of my students would last. They all run away. Now, as part of that, and having various trips around China, one of the things I think that people who haven't been to China don't understand very much is that China is amazingly, amazingly, amazingly vast and amazingly, amazingly, amazingly complex. And this is a point I've made when I was talking about Africa. The lack of education in the West these days is truly appalling, and there is a view that all Africans are the same. Well, they're not. It's a continent. West Africa is completely different from East Africa, and there's huge differences there. But I think in the age of sort of Twitter, everybody's got a sort of three-word understanding of a cliche of everything. And in the same way, for people who haven't been to China or studied anything in China, there's a tendency to think, oh yes, there's Chinese and they're in China. But actually, if you go there, it's vast. And I travelled around Yunnan, for example, the southern southwesty province, which was just vast. I mean, it's probably bigger than any country in Europe itself. And that's just one of many, many provinces. And going back to my Zhang lineage, my Sifu, Master Lam Kan Chuan, is from Hong Kong. He's Cantonese. He's shorter than me. But my Sigang, my master's master, Professor Yu, was right from the north of China, and he's probably taller than me, a huge bear of a man. So the people vary, and not just that, but the cuisines vary. So the cliche, is rice. Yes, there is rice in China, but actually, if you go to the north, there's also quite a lot of wheat. So I don't know, Eva, how you would try and, just 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, give people who've never been to China and who don't know anything about it some sense of the sort of huge regional variation. I mean, if you were to spend a year traveling around China, you'd have a very different experiences, although with a commonality, of course.
Indeed, yeah. So, Mike, you actually tap into a very interesting topic. So, for example, that actually, like your Shigong, I was born and grew up in northern China as well. So, my hometown is somewhere north of Beijing. It's actually where the Winter Olympic happened last year. So, as someone who grew up in northern China, and then I married to a family. So my husband's family is from the south of China, which is not far away from Shanghai province. So it's a city called Nanjing. So when I went to their family, actually there are different dishes that I have never tried before when I was grew up in northern China. And there are different habits, like different ways of doing things, even that with the same family. And actually Nanjing is not that far from the central China yet. So that's already the difference. And then actually you mentioned about Yunnan. So actually a couple years ago, I had a beautiful trip in Yunnan myself. So I still remembered that I landed with a flight in Kunming, so which is the capital city of Yunnan province. And when I was trying to get to another famous place, Dali, so I hired a car. So basically drive it about 6-7 hours all the way. It's like the same distance I drive from London to Edinburgh, probably that distance. But, I actually was inside of a province. From one city to another city is already 6 to 7 hours. So that can give people some idea of the geographic vastness of the country.
Yes, and I think perhaps in the UK, I mean, in the UK we didn't used to eat out at all. Almost at all in the 60s and 70s, but so-called Chinese takeaways came into fashion, and it may be, thinking about it with hindsight, I mean, my master came here in the 70s, which is that the British experience of China, Chinese food in particular, was Cantonese. We had quite a lot of Cantonese people coming over there and cooking Cantonese food. So people go, oh yes, that's Chinese food. Well, actually, that's Cantonese food, and you've got different dumplings and all that kind of thing. And I'm not quite sure how it works in other Chinatowns, the diaspora who've gone around the world, and obviously Singapore as well. But I mean, just bringing it a bit nearer to home, it was occurring to me before the podcast that apart from being an ancient civilization, China has always been very practical and actually very good at business. So if you see where Chinese people go, they tend to do extremely well at business. I mean, Singapore being a prime example. Singapore was a complete mess in 1965, or when it was the British pulled out. It was a sort of just a rubbish kind of naval port, but now it's absolutely impressive. So I think there's this kind of mysticism. People see Oriental mysticism about China, and China can be very complex. You can keep sort of zooming in fractally and never quite get it. But at the same time, there's also a simple pragmatism,
Indeed, yeah.
which is, okay, a business is supposed to make profit.
Yes, yeah, that's very important, yeah.
Right, okay, well, we'll get on to profit later. Hopefully Alipay makes profit.
Sure, I can guarantee you that, yeah.
Yes, probably need a sort of big abacus to sort of count that, or a large computer. But before we sort of dive into the fintech in China, maybe you let listeners know, Eva, your career journey. How come you're here today as CEO of Alipay in the UK? Were you coming from a management consultant perspective or a technology perspective originally, or a banker? What's your background?
Yeah, sure. So, Mike, actually, I think different from some of your speakers that actually I had a career of technology industries. So I was, as mentioned, that I was born and grew up in northern China. However, I was educated and working like in lots of different cities, countries globally. So I used to spend 2 years in Tokyo. So I was in Hong Kong and Singapore for a while, and then I was working in Shanghai. I went to business school in New York, and of course London. So I spent past of the 10 years of my career in London. So so I would say that I'm quite international from business and education perspective, and then all my career is about technology. So I've been working for Alibaba Group for almost 7 years. So before that, I was with Hewlett Packard, then was Equinix. So it was always been technology. And then actually, I think from my career path, it explains a little bit about Ant Group as well. So different from lots of fintechs in other part of the world, I would say that Alipay Ant Group is quite technology driven. So that's why, I was started the career as an engineer in the networking, then data center, and then cloud. And then actually before I started lead the business for Alipay UK, I was actually in charge of Alibaba Cloud's business in UK. So yeah, basically my career path is a very technology oriented career path, and this is how Alipay is, that our focus, our advantage is not in financial service, but instead is how we can use technology to solve the daily requirements of people's life or business needs, and then we became who we are today.
It's interesting actually, because I was just reminding myself this morning, talking of China, of Joseph Needham's amazing 7 or 27 volumes, depending on the account, it's Science and Civilization in China, which he published in the middle of last century, which is a phenomenal thing. And I was reminded that Francis Bacon, one of the pioneers of enlightenment and science in this country in the 17th century, he gave us an example of the enlightenment and scientific progress in the West. I think 3 things, all of which were invented by China long ago. So China has got a very long tradition of being excellent at technology. So we will hear a little bit about that in the dessert course, and in particular, this interesting thing from a fintech perspective for fintechs all around the world, that actually you've got a platform which serves lots of users, and then with good technology, you can add to that platform things which aren't immediately obvious. I mean, notoriously, for example, I thought Jeff Bezos was crazy when he said that Amazon's going to do more than books. I thought, no way, you do books really well, man. So it shows what I know, and plenty of people over here. Tom from Monzo was on many years ago, and his aim was to make Monzo your personal financial platform. Well, great aim, but the execution didn't work. Now, clearly you guys are really good at execution because you're making it work as a technology company. So we'll come back to that. So before we dive into the sort of sectors and the geographical breakdown of fintech in China, maybe you give us a little bit of background about what you see as the history of fintech in China. Now, fintech, as I always have to say in these circumstances, is a very silly word, used to mean different things by different people. And some people say, oh, fintech started in the 1960s when computers did, bank statements and stuff like that. But I'm kind of meaning it in the 21st century way, that you've got these innovations due to changes in technology like cloud computing, like mobile phones, and you've got these financial servicey businesses growing up outside the traditional banking. And of course, traditional banking was very different in China in the 20th century from, say, America. So you've got this complex background. So maybe if you could give us a little bit of a background, a little bit of an overview perhaps of the last sort of 20 years and when it really took off. I mean, in the UK, it started growing about 2010 here. And then I started the podcast in 2014. No one really cared. So actually, it's only within 10 years that fintech as a fintech thing has really got going. But what's it been like in China?
Indeed, yeah. So, Mike, actually, I fully agree with you that it's like, if I look back to the fintech industry in China for the past 20 years, at that time when we started it, actually, we don't know it was a fintech. Nobody knows how to call them, but doesn't matter. So I think what matters is that, at that time, almost 20 years ago, that Alibaba Group just started a new business called Taobao. So you were talking about my earrings, so I got it from Taobao. Taobao is a place that literally you can get everything you need from, and there's lots of different options. So when 20 years ago that Taobao as an e-commerce platform was founded, so except the Euro challenges with the e-commerce platform, actually one of the major issue we are facing is that we need to find a way to make the payment. We got the seller, we got the buyer, but how can they pay each other? Because the card coverage in the population at the time is very, very limited. It's still limited today, but much better than 20 years ago. So, there's no card, there's no ready solutions. So if we want to go the e-commerce business, we have to find a way to enable the buyers and the sellers to do the transaction with each other, and then they have to have confidence that if the buyer sends the money, he or she will get the goods. Well, for the sellers, that if he or she send out the goods, he need to have the confidence that he will get the money. So actually, that is the time that we stand out, that created the first word of Alipay. So that was more than 20 years ago that just started from a simple problem. Then we figure out the solution, and then in the past 20 years, then we're trying to improve the solution, and then along the side there are other needs. So that's why we got started from payment only, that we started to add other factors into this, such as Huabei, which is equivalent of buy now, pay later. We have the investment product. And to be fair, except Alipay ourselves, I think I want to talk about our successful peers as well in the China landscape. So again, this is how Alipay started. We started from the customer needs. And then similar story happens with WeChat Pay. WeChat Pay is actually part of the Tencent group, as you know, that so WeChat Pay is very successful in China in terms of fintech as well. So again, that different from Alipay, but similar as Alipay, that WeChat Pay wasn't started as a fintech company. WeChat Pay started as a company doing lots of interesting games, and then gradually they have grown themselves into the different sectors. They started WeChat as a very popular tools. It's something very similar to the way of WhatsApp doing, but they have added different factors into it, include the payment. Again, it is because there's the customer needs, and then they figure out how is the best way to sort the customer needs. So I think by taking Alipay, WeChat Pay, and there's Ping An's group. So by taking all the different examples, I would say that the fintech history in China is quite different from other countries. There wasn't a genius, a super smart product manager who planned everything out. It's not like that. It's rather that, we do the e-commerce business. Tencent was doing the chatting business, that we see there's a customer needs, and then we figure out a way with use technology as the accelerator to make that happen. So I think that probably is how it looks like for the fintech landscape in China.
Interesting. So the deepest roots of fintech, in the way that we use the word in the 21st century, are very parallel to the story of PayPal, which is that online commerce happened. There were some companies hanging around and thought, everyone's having a problem paying. They solved that particular problem. And then I think from what you're talking about, that what distinguishes the development of the Chinese payment platforms compared to in America, which is that PayPal these days is still pretty much doing payments, whereas in China there's been more diversification. And we'll get onto the various verticals, the various sectors of fintech within China in a minute, but obviously without going too much into history, at a certain point in time, China imported, I presume, because I always assume that Zopa invented it in 2005, the peer-to-peer lending, which is a deposit product and then a lending product on the other side, which came along a little later as well. And in that context, I mean, I don't think we need to dive into it too much, but in that context, one of the differentiating factors between China and say Europe and America, certainly in the UK and America, the banks have a stranglehold and have had for, I don't know, centuries, a stranglehold on this sector. And ever since we went off the gold standard, which hopefully the BRICS may introduce in some small way soon, unlimited printing of money over here has caused all sorts of problems. So over here, it's been very difficult for fintechs. Let's just take Zopa as an example, or RateSetter or others in the peer-to-peer market. They said, look, we'll give you a good interest rate, whether you're a borrower or lender, but they couldn't really take off because the banks own 99.99999% of the market. In China, one of the distinguishing factors is that consumer lending wasn't such a great thing, such a huge market in the late 20th century. So there was more scope in some areas for innovation and for new technologies to come in and be more successful. And I think certainly this is one of the things that Peter said when we were last talking about China on the show, which is that there wasn't a sort of huge, I don't know, let's take America. There wasn't a huge Citigroup or JP Morgan owning everything. And, you know, they're like some hugely important people and you're trying to sort of squeeze into the table with them. No, there was sort of more, you know, white space on the map and areas to be covered, not just payments. But before we dive into the sectors, maybe you give us a little guide to the key geographies. I was very interested in India. I think there were sort of 4 areas where you could go to good fintech parties if you wanted to meet fintechers and talk about fintech in the evening. But again, just using whatever definition you want, which areas, which cities in China are the major ones for fintech?
Yeah, so I think like, you know, so we can either talk about it city levels or we can talk about region levels. And like Mike, you mentioned earlier that China is such a vast country. So from geographic like a perspective that we can see there are 3 major clusters of cities that like, you know, fintechs really matters. And like those cities, talent from those cities really played important roles. So the first and foremost is definitely Beijing. Beijing is the capital of China, and more importantly, that, you know, there are dozens of leading like universities in Beijing, such as Tsinghua University, Peking University. So as a result, that Beijing does have this advantage of there's enough talent pool. So as a result, that, you know, there is a very active fintech ecosystem in the Beijing areas. Like, you know, there are startups there like almost every month, every year. So that is one important one. And then like in around the center of China, there's Shanghai and Hangzhou. Very proudly to say that, you know, Alibaba as a company, Ant Group, we're both from Hangzhou. So I don't know, Mike, have you been to Hangzhou?
No, that's the northwest, isn't it?
Yeah, so in that case, you know, we have to invite you into Hangzhou. So like, you know, so you know a lot about the like, you know, culture, history about China. So historically and culturally, Hangzhou is a very important city. So Hangzhou and Shanghai, those are the 2 cities very close to each other. Nowadays, with the express train, it only takes about 1 hour to commute between these 2 cities again. So this is the cluster of places that on one hand that you have a lot of international business with their headquarters in Shanghai, especially for the financial service business. On the other hand, actually Hangzhou is the capital city of this province called Zhejiang province. So Zhejiang province has been historically a place that people are very pro-business, and there are lots of like, you know, famous business persons, famous business group over there. And then when the Alibaba e-commerce platform was started, actually more than half of a lot of the suppliers were from that Zhejiang province. So there is a very strong historical, culture, and business background for Hangzhou to become the capital of fintech in China. Well, like, you know, Hangzhou benefited from Shanghai, from this core economic area as well. And then I would say that, to be fair, the cluster around Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, you know, that is another area which matters with like, you know, fintech as well. Actually, Tencent has their headquarters over there, and then in Hong Kong we have our Alipay Hong Kong wallets, which is part of the A+ scheme that I will talk a little bit later. So I think all of these 3 clusters of areas, cities, matter quite a lot in the fintech development in China.
Interesting. Well, before we move off geography, I think going back to everyone misunderstanding everything in the modern world. It's very easy, if you haven't been listening to the podcast or similar, to misunderstand America. So America is a country. Everybody knows what you mean when you say America. Most people know where it is on the map. But the interesting thing I found, especially doing insurance, but I think also the peer-to-peers in America, which is that, ironically perhaps, America is still quite a bit of confederacy rather than a federal thing, by which I mean, if you're in, let's say, Europe, which is still not very nation states, less than it was, somewhat nation states, but there's sort of, regulation on open banking, for example, and that applies across Europe, and that's your open banking regulation. But in America, if you're an insurance company in particular, and I remember the pain of these, which is that there isn't an insurance regulator who says, you're fine, go and insure things all over America. No, you've got to get one state by state by state by state, which is a really tedious process. And there were sort of similar problems in banking in America, which has really held America back. So actually, although America from the outside looks like a country, you end up having to get 52 licenses on some activities. Is it the same in China, or is China the question that you get a license and that license is for China, and you don't have to go to each province and see a local regulator and say, oh, hello, local regulator, yes, I'm in 24 provinces, but I haven't done yours, and you start all over again.
So I would say in that case that, we do have an advantage in China that is like one unified regulators, and they when it comes to different sectors, it is one license. But it's not today, right? You know that from 2,000 years ago, from the Qing dynasty, we already started this cultures of we, even though that there are lots of different provinces, it's lots of different cuisine, but it is one central system. Yeah.
Right, it's a great advantage because once you've got your license, you've got your license compared to America. And yes, you don't let's not get sucked down the rabbit hole, because one of the interesting things I found about reading about Chinese history quite some time ago, a few decades ago, was the whole cyclical idea about history in China. The West, as you know, or sort of certainly the UK and its offspring, its problem child in America, has this linear thing, progress, Whig history, progress. Everything keeps getting better and better and better. Well, we're seeing that it doesn't necessarily do that, not now, not in the 21st century, not for America and Britain and Europe, but China with things like the Qing dynasty. And, it expands and it sort of contracts and falls apart and expands and contracts. And so the cyclical idea is another one. But let's not get sucked down the cyclical one. I'm here to talk about fintech. I shall discipline myself. Right, so Eva, so what are the major subsectors within fintech in China, and could you give us a little bit of idea of those, which are the important ones, who some key players are, or what's going on at the moment?
Yeah, sure. And again, like Mike, as have the story roll out for the fintech histories. I think when it comes to the fintech sectors in China, it's rather, instead of manually we divide them into different sectors, it's more about what are the areas that people need technology, and the players such as ourselves and other peers made it possible. So as you can imagine, the first and the largest one is payment, because payment is a sector that you need it on the daily basis. No matter you are a millionaire, billionaire, or you just live a normal life, that you need to make the payment. So that is the largest sectors, and I would say that there's almost the base line of all of the other different business rolled out. So on top of the payment, then people so as you can imagine that when you have enough money in your digital wallets, the next thing for sure you want to get is some interest. So the kind of similar as a saving account. So that is the second sector. So it says that is about how you can do the saving, how you can do the invest. And on top of that is about the investment, and then on top of that is we used to call it micro loan. Well, I think in recent years people tend to call it as buy now pay later sectors. So that is where no matter it is individual consumers or when they come to the business, that in certain point you just get some extra money, extra loans from the system. Yeah. So I would say that those are the major sectors that technology make a difference, to people's life. Yeah.
Okay, right. That's an interesting overview already, and I can see that my Western mentality of sort of segmenting things along sort of verticals along these different silos which is relatively useful in London fintech. It isn't so useful in China. But just to sort of zoom in and look at a few more pixels and more information within all of these things. If I'm a typical person in China, some professional, what kind of things can I be using my phone for? What kind of companies are there? Do I just have one app that does everything? What's the actual experience like for consumers? Has the market consolidated in all of these, what I used to call verticals, but things like, okay, let's call them segments. Investment is one thing, lending money is another thing, payments is another thing, even if the companies that do them cover the lot.
Yeah, Mike, I think I probably have to answer the question into two steps. So first of all, I will talk in details, in depth, as you asked, for some of the sectors. But then more importantly, that I actually want to introduce something called a super app. I'm sure that you heard about this before, right?
No, most of my apps are pretty rubbish. They're not super at all, actually.
Yeah, so actually, if I show you my Alipay app in front of you, sorry that, it's a different direction, but basically, this is super app.
Right. So basically, for all of those people listening to this and not seeing it, so I've got Revolut, which comes the nearest perhaps to doing something like this. And Revolut, as I was just complaining about the last podcast, it has lots and lots of features, but they're so hidden away, I can't really find them, and I can't be bothered to look them up. I'm sort of, not very good at using phones, maybe. But actually, what you're just showing me there is much more of a sort of, let's say 20 or a good dozen plus different functionalities within the same app. So maybe explain super apps, because I don't think we have super apps in Europe, and I'm not sure America has super apps because of the segmentization, because there's the silos, which may have come from the whole structure of banking and insurance historically in these countries. So let's just dive into the whole super app thing then, which I think is pretty unique to China. I mean, I'm sure it hasn't cropped up in India or Africa actually yet.
Indeed, actually, Mike, I believe that Elon Musk has mentioned once. So for once that he wants to develop Twitter now X into a super app. So I'm not sure whether it's accurate news, but I definitely heard it from Elon Musk before. So I think basically again come back to the question you asked me about different sectors. So I think by someone who been living in London for almost 10 years, that same as everyone in my mobile phone, that I have dozens of different apps. For example, I have Deliveroo if I want to order food, that I have Uber if I want to order taxi, I have Revolut Monzo if I want to make payment. So this is how my daily life in London works. Well, if I go back to China, the only thing I need, and actually the only thing I have, is Alipay. So with Alipay, that we have something called a mini program. So for example, that if I want to order food, I can order it directly from my Alipay app, where the local food delivery players such as Alibaba or Meituan, so they actually has their user interface inside of Alipay. They do have separate apps for information, but instead of install separate their app, I can directly order it from Alipay. Or if I want to get a taxi, so I can actually use Didi. I can install this separate app called Didi, but again, that I can use it directly from my Alipay app. So as a result, actually the crazy thing is that if you want to get married, instead of go to the government places, you can order it from your Alipay. So
can you order a bride or a husband from Alipay as well, or is that not there yet?
Not yet, but thanks for the requirement. I will let our product manager use the case. Yeah. So as a result, it's there was hundreds of thousands of different mini program that has been reside inside of Alipay app. So that is what we call it as a super app, which means that with one app, by doing one time of user authentication, you get access to all of the hundreds of thousands of different applications you need in your life.
That's fascinating. Well, I'm sure all the listeners who know way more about fintech than I do will have heard of super apps, and I'm probably the only person in the world who hasn't done the super app. But as I say, you sort of waved it out to me, but maybe you just give us some example of the Alipay app, of the actual mini programs and functionality. You've mentioned some of them, but just to give the listeners a feel for how rich the potential of this super app approach is.
Yeah, so actually, for example, for not only for the Chinese consumers, actually for our Alipay users here in London. So actually, it's normally targeted as newcomers or tourists or students who actually just came to London last week, about to start a new life here, for a couple of years. So he or she doesn't know where to find the food delivery, right? So she doesn't know delivery yet. So they can just open Alipay and then look for food delivery. And then a couple of our mini program in that case can just jump out.
I see. So how kind of international is Alipay now? I mean, your screen was Chinese, so if I downloaded Alipay, I wouldn't get very far because I'd sort of recognise the character for big and maybe the character for door, and that'd be about it. But is Alipay now an international app, or is it sort of just still a Chinese domestic base and then Chinese diaspora who are around the world? Where are you on that internationalization scale?
Yeah, so again, two parts of the story. So I've started from the shorter part and then the long, more complicated part. So first of all, if you look for Alipay as the app in the store, actually there is an English version there. So nowadays, if you go to China, if you go to Shanghai or go to Hangzhou for the Asian Olympic happening very soon in next month, so actually you can actually download the Alipay and then put your Visa MasterCard into it. So you can just use Alipay to do any of your daily life. So you don't need to worry about, I only have cash, what should I do? So this is actually one of the big challenges that lots of our foreign friends met when they get into China, because, that not every place is accept card, not every place is accept cash. Or alternatively, I would say that most places nowadays only accept digital wallets in QR code. So if you go to China, download the Alipay app, get your credit card into it, then you can just do your daily life. So that's the inbound part. But more importantly, myself and my team, we're doing the other part, the internationalization, about how we grow Alipay business out of China. So by talking about UK specifically, that we are building this a solution called Alipay Plus. So this is a digital payment and marketing solutions. So by doing Alipay Plus, it's not that we do a Alipay app in UK. It's not that game. So our game is that by building this core platform, on one hand we have mobile partners. For example, in Asia, we have lots of partners such as KakaoPay from Korea. We have Money from Thailand. And then in Europe, we have Tinaba from Italy. So on one hand, you have all of these mobile partners. On the other hand, you have the hundreds, thousands of acquirers and millions of merchants. So both of them can work with each other through our Alipay Plus network. So this is the work that we are doing right now.
Oh, interesting. Well, you'll have to send me an email. I'll have to download the Alipay app when I can get rid of Deliveroo and all my banking apps and things like that. And just in terms of similarities and metaphors, I mentioned Jeff Bezos before and Amazon when it went from doing books to doing all these crazy things which I thought wouldn't work. But Amazon now is actually a kind of, let's call it a super app. Not exactly in the way you're using it, but it's kind of, because you go to Amazon and actually you end up buying from different merchants. They're just pulling all these things together, doing the logistics, coordinating it. So actually, when I'm purchasing things, I go to Amazon and they've sorted all that out. So I think in a similar way, for people who don't know about super apps, maybe there's a parallel with that. And interestingly, the previous podcast with Gonzalo from Renewal, they've got an app, but actually mainly they're white labeling it. And I should maybe put you in contact with Gonzalo. They're labeling it to manage your insurance portfolio. So they've got they're selling their technology to banks or perhaps such as yourselves, and you can have a mini app there, and you can manage your house insurance and your car insurance, and it sorts all of that out. So I think that sort of same mentality. Well, that's very fascinating, and it definitely reminds me of what Peter Renton said to me 5 years ago, that if you want to know what fintech's capable of, go to China, don't go to America. And for the avoidance of doubt, he's American these days. I mean, he came from Australia originally. Well, that's very fascinating. It's not something I caught on. I mean, just one point of interest in terms of going back to the domestic market, and before we sort of look at the future and then wrap up with shout-outs for Alipay. Obviously, a big thing in Europe and also the UK, I'm not sure where it's in America, but never mind, has been this whole open banking data, which has enabled various functionalities and a new lease of life for various sort of fintechs to do, I don't know, credit ratings better, as the episode before last touched on, or for the sake of argument, I don't do this, but if I just press the right button, I could get all of my different bank accounts consolidated in an overview. So does China have any equivalent to this sort of open banking data regulation or infrastructure?
Yeah, so actually, as a business that based in UK, that we are very excited about open banking. I think FC and European regulators have done a great work to make this happen. I think open banking played a very important role to help lots of fintech to strive and grow themselves in this market. So yeah, we are very excited about that. Then and actually, we would like to work with different partners in the UK and European market to leverage that technology as well. Yeah.
But that doesn't exist in China. There isn't yet an open banking thing.
Not that I'm aware of. I think in China that one thing that we've been keep talking about, I think on one hand is about exclusion finance, which means that how we can leverage technology to not only helping people who living in the city, but the people who live in the countryside who doesn't have access to the comprehensive technologies. So that is one important part. And then another thing we would do, we've been investing quite a lot is in the ESG areas. Again, I don't know whether you have heard about the Ant Forest story. That is beautifully done that. So basically, as an Alipay user, if you plant, if you have a very environmental lifestyle, for example, you take a bus instead of driving your car, you use digital receipt instead of printing something out with paper, then you will get some extra energies with your ant forest. So you have a tree here. So as soon as you have enough energies, you can plant a tree in your app. So if individuals you plant a tree in your app, the ant group will plant a real tree.
Interesting. Well, I was about to ask you to wrap up this section about the future of fintech in China, but I think the future of fintech everywhere is already in China. But so maybe we should know where you think it's going in the next sort of 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, given that you've got the super apps already, my imagination is running a bit short. But having said that, I'm sure Ant will be doing something interesting in 5 years' time. Where do you see developments?
I think again that same as you, Mike, to be honest with you, that I think for one hand that we are definitely technology driven. So what is very clear for us is that we set up the focus areas of technology, as you can imagine, including the computing technology, the privacy computing, about the green tech. So that is something we're 100% sure. On the other hand, in terms of what is going to be the new application, so in that regard, we will keep doing as what we used to do, that we will let the customer, let the market to lead us in the right direction. Yeah. Well, we are very solidly rooted in our technology development. Actually, one interesting thing that I want to mention is about the large language model. As you know that this is a super hot topic. Everyone is doing it. As you can imagine, we are doing it as well. So with Ant, our LM model's name is called Zhenyi. So I think, Mike, you probably can recognize it's a female's name. So actually, this is one of the female scientists who lived about 200, 300 years ago.
Yes, I don't know her that well.
I don't know this lady either. So, but I googled her up. She's a typical educated Chinese female that she studied in science. She is very talented in writing different poems. Maybe I should send one of her poems to you.
Yes, thank you very much. As you say, then, so LLM is a huge thing in itself. Okay, so before we wrap up the show, I'd like to thank all listeners out there, my brand partners of the podcast. Smart is transforming pensions and retirement worldwide. Their leading-edge retirement tech platform propelled them success in the UK. Now they're operating on 4 continents and working with partners like Zurich and JP Morgan. Find out more at www.smart.co. Thenlistedboard.com, your guide to entrepreneurial governance and how you can start making your board an engine of growth today. So, Eva, you've given us a fascinating introduction, and I'm thinking that maybe my research should have lasted more than 3 minutes 42 seconds beforehand. But I was aware at the back of my mind that one of the distinguishing factors of fintech in China compared to other regions is how technology driven it has been, firstly, but also secondly, how good the execution of that has been, as I say, not just in Monzo, but in plenty of places around the world. People have had aspirations to do, say, super apps and amazing things, but they haven't actually managed it. So it's technology driven, but it's extremely well executed. And maybe you'd like to just wrap up with more of the local stuff and shout outs rather than shout outs for Alipay around the world, and perhaps let us know what Alipay UK need more of to be even bigger and better tomorrow. And the direction of travel for Alipay's internationalization in general. I mean, I didn't ask you, but maybe you can explain. Does Alipay, how many offices does it have outside China? So maybe tell us about the international aspect of Alipay, and then what you need more of, which listeners should be checking you out or contacting you with their apps to incorporate and this kind of thing going forward.
Mike, thanks for this opportunity. So we actually, with Ant International, that we have more than 20 offices outside of mainland China that covers all the major countries and markets, include the UK, Europe, Singapore, Japan, and a couple of other Asia Pacific countries. And it's like here in UK, in London, we have this like beautiful office in New Bank Tower. So let me know when you come to London next time. I will host you a tea session here. So for part of our growth plan here, that Alipay Plus is one of the most important strategy for us. As mentioned, that with Alipay Plus, that we want to work with like on one hand the mobile partners, on the other hand the acquirers and merchants. So for anyone who is interested to like doing business with Alipay, our door is always open. You can either find me from my LinkedIn like page, or I'm sure like Mike, there will be a contact left in the podcast later, right? So we are open for business. We want to work with mobile partners. We want to work with acquirers. We want to work with technology providers. Yeah, so let's make UK as the fintech hub of like Europe, and more importantly globally. Yeah, so we have lots of confidence in UK, and we are keeping investing in UK market as well.
Well, that's fascinating, and it certainly will make the international fintech much more interesting to have alternatives outside the kind of USE banks and their kind of system. And there's obviously lots of context to this, but in terms of things like de-dollarization and the growth of BRICS and multipolarity and many options and all that, I think that putting the sort of the global geopolitics to one side, I think it's always the case that more competition is a good thing for everybody. I mean, that's what the Olympics, you mentioned the Olympics, that's what it thrives on. If you had the Olympics with 2 countries, they wouldn't really try very hard. But when you've got everybody there, that's aspirational. And it's not just the competition and trying to beat the company next to you, but also it's the sharing of ideas and possibilities and technologies, and so that ideally the consumer gets served ever better. So thank you very much for that, Eva. It's been quite a long episode, but China is quite a large country, and I think that in many ways China, because of its sort of middle kingdomy, somewhat inwards looking thing over the last couple of thousand years, it's a really interesting time. Apparently it's an interesting time in feng shui terms actually for China in this century. But I think even if you don't know feng shui at that level, I think you can work that one out for yourself. And I'm reminded of talking of history, just to end up with history, apologies for my pronunciation as usual, the Zhenghe treasure ships, which were something like 15th century, going back to China's Great Leads. Zheng He was, I don't know, minister or something, and he set out in a bunch of ships and huge ships and fleets around sort of Southeast Asia. And if the emperor had a rather sort of a different opinion, or the Ming dynasty, I think it was at the time, had a different perspective, then actually Southeast Asia and perhaps the rest of the world would have seen a Chinese empire rather than British empire, which came to dominate large parts of the world. But they changed their mind and it went home, and Zheng He was kind of covered up pretty much for centuries in China, and China has looked rather inwards. And I think the amazing stat on that, which sticks in my mind to this day, which is that no ships as big as the ships that China built in the 15th century, no fleets as big as the fleets that China built in the 15th century were seen until World War I, with all the battleships. I mean, that's how many centuries it took to get anything on that scale. So yes, Chinese history has been cyclical, but China's always been very inventive. And when China has done something historically, it's done it very well. And just bringing it back home to the fintech story, I think that it's very clear from what you're saying that I can only think of Amazon as a parallel, that just taking Alipay, that you've clearly done this very well to provide all of this functionality. I mean, I was joking about apps, but I get fed up of apps. I mean, I've got 99 on my phone, so what? I probably can't even remember half the apps I've got. So we've got to the stage of complexity growing, but actually from a customer, and this goes back to what Gonzalo was saying about renewal, from a customer, you don't want one insurance app and you're over here and you've got a banking app over there and a something else app over there and a something else app over there. A consolidation in the way that Amazon's done it seems a very interesting thing going forward. So I wish you and Alipay and FinTech in China every success in the future.
Thank you very much, Mike. I really enjoyed our conversation. We should have another one.
Excellent. Good. I look forward to that too. Thanks for listening. If you're in need of a non-executive or advisory director with deep expertise, experience and contacts in the worlds of both traditional FS and FinTech, or unique insight into how to make your board an engine of growth today, contact me at mike@mikeballiman.com. If you just need one-off advice in these areas, via clarity.fm/mikeballiman.
We could sit in a bender all day, watching the firelight dance, watching the firelight dance. We could walk in the mountains before dawn, watching a happy moonrise, watching a happy moonrise. Come away from the city, with the tarmac so dead and the people so sad. Come away from the city, with the faces so grey, with the pain of the everyday. We are wild like the mountains and the trees. Can you see what I mean? Can you see what I mean? We fit in between the earth and the sky. Kiss the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye. The city goodbye. Watch the firelight dance with me. 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 Watch the fire.